All right, welcome back. And today we are going to do two problems related to matrices. And these are the problems. So the first one, we want to create matrix. And then the second one, we want to add matrices. We'll only do those two just so that we can combine all the knowledge that we got from the previous lessons and then use them here. And then potentially the assignment will be related to matrices. Okay, so here, what I want to do is I want to write a function that creates a zero matrix of size mn. So this is like m times n, where m is the number of rows and n is the number of columns. This should be quite simple. As long as we remember how to append to a list, we can make this matrix. So how do we do this? Well, first, we should initialize a matrix. Let's just call it my matrix. You can call it anything you want. So the goal here is to create a empty list. And then what we're gonna do is for each row, we're gonna create another list, maybe called my row or something like that. And then once we have that row, we will append it as many zero as we need to fill out the number of columns. So in case you didn't know, a zero matrix is a matrix that all of its values are set to zero. So first what we can do is we're gonna loop through the number of rows, and then let's just do this. My matrix, append an empty row. Let's just do this for now. Actually, yeah, let's just do that for now. And then at the end, what you want to do is you return my matrix. All right, so what would that give me? Oopsies, for I in range. Okay, so create matrix, let's say 4 times 5. So now I have a list of 4 empty lists. So we know that, imagine if the column is 5, then what we want is 5 of these. Let's see what this looks like. Create matrix, and then 4, 5. And then now we have this, but this does not work if we give it 2s because we want 2 columns. So what should we do to fill this out? Well, I guess what we can do is first, we can initialize a myRow variable, which is an empty list, and then we're gonna loop again, and then this is the inner loop. For I in range n, which means the number of columns, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna fill the row with as many zeros as I need, which is the number of columns, and then once it's all filled, what I wanna do is fill that matrix with that row, right? So this row has been appended, a bunch of zeros, and then after I'm done appending the zeros, I am going to append the whole row into the matrix, and this should work. So create matrix 4, 3, 4. Now you see there's 3 rows, and then there's 4 elements in each row, aka 4 columns. So yeah, there you have it. We have create matrix. So next, the reason why we want to define this function is because we want to create a new matrix. You can add 2 matrices, but what I want to do is I want to create a new matrix and then be it the sum of those 2 matrices together. So here, the first thing I want to do is create a new matrix. Actually, before we do that, do you know how to add matrices? So when you want to add matrices together, they have to be exactly the same size, right? So because you need them to be the same size, you have to check that first, because if they're not the same size, it should return some kind of error, or it should just say that you're not allowed to do that. So what we want to do is, let's say we want to return empty array if there's an error. All right. So first, what we're going to do, we're going to count the number of rows. Okay. No, actually, what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that M1 and M2 have the same length in terms of rows and columns. So how would we do that? So first, we could compare the row number. So length of the matrix, that will give us the row number. So then if that's not true, or if the length of the first row, which is the number of columns, which I'll get the number of columns, length of 0, okay? And then if that's the case, then I'll return an empty array because there's an error, because they're not the same size. Not same size, okay? But you have to be careful here because there is a small bug. What if you have an empty matrix and then let's just say a matrix that's 1 by 1. Oops. Right? Oh wait, I didn't even define it yet. It's called add matrices. Add matrices. If I have an empty matrix, a matrix of size 0, and then a matrix of size 1, oh, actually that's fine. Sorry. I guess what I'm saying is, if they're both empty matrices, there's actually an error. And the reason why is because they do have the same number of rows, which is 0, right? Because the length of an empty matrix is 0. So they both have 0. But on the second condition, we are looking at the element inside the list, which is supposed to be the row. But here, because the matrix is size 0, we can't even look at the first row. So it just gives us an error because you're accessing something that does not exist, because the length of this list is 0 and you're trying to access the first element. All right. So these are called edge cases. What we can do is we can add an if statement to make sure that if one of them is an empty matrices, then we're just going to return empty. All right. Now, there's actually one more issue that might arise, but I'll let you try to figure out what it is, and I'll tell you at the end after I finish defining this function. So now that we know the matrices are the same size, what we're going to do is we're going to define number of rows equals this length. We chose M1. Oops, I made a mistake here. Should be M1, and here should be M2. Yeah, so the number of rows, you can choose M1 or M2 because it passed these 4 statements, or like these 2 statements, then we know that both of the matrices have the same size. All right, so I just chose M1. You could have chose M2 if you wanted to. And then the number of column will be the length of M1, and you take the first element of it, which is the first row. All right, cool. All right, now what do we do? This is the meaty part. So what we want to do is we just want to iterate through the whole matrix and then just add them together. That's pretty much it. Matrix addition is pretty simple. As you can see here, for each cell of the matrix, you just add them together. So 8 plus 0, 0, 3 plus 5, 7 plus 2. That's it. So how do you do that? Well, first, let's create a new matrix. And what's the size? Number of rows, number of columns. So now you have a new matrix. Let's call it my matrix. Or let's just call it M0 so that we can be quick. And then what we want to do is we want to iterate through the whole matrix. And how do we do that? Range of rows. We're going to iterate through the whole matrix for each row. And then for each row, we want to go to each column. All right. And then now what we're going to do is we are going to assign M0, and then whichever cell we're at will be equal to the M1, that cell, plus the second matrix. So essentially what we're doing, if we look back at the image, is imagine if this is M0, then what we're doing is for each cell, for example, we start at 0, 0, which is this cell, it's going to be equal to 4 plus 1, which is the 0, 0 cell of the first one, plus the 0, 0 cell of the second matrix, right? So this is M1, this is M2, this is M0, where we are defining M0 as M0 plus M1. Sorry, I meant M1 plus M2. And then that's pretty much it. And then what do? You return your matrix, M0. Let's see if it works. All right, add matrices. Ooh, okay. I'm gonna define a few matrices right now. If you have the last lesson saved, you'll remember this function, print matrix, and also this matrix. So we'll just reuse that. Okay, so let's try to add matrix. Add matrices. Oops. Matrices, matrix, and matrix. What's matrix? Matrix is this matrix. So there is an error, and the error is pretty clear. It's right here. M2, M2. Yeah, so here's the process of debugging, right? You just read the error message, and they also tell you the line too, line 15, so it was here, right? So it's pretty convenient. Perfect. So now it works. You know that matrix is this. Well, I'm just gonna print it. So this is our matrix, and then once we add it, we're gonna have the new matrix. I'll just call it matrix new, and then print matrix matrix new. This is what it looks like, which seems about right because I just added the same matrix together. Do you think you can spot the bug in add matrices? If you haven't spotted the bug, don't worry. It's a little bit tricky. So the bug is we are assuming that M1 and M2 are matrices. So what can happen is, well, it's usually okay to assume if there's like documentation that tells you exactly what you have to be inputted. But for here, it's possible that your matrix, quote unquote matrix, looks like this, right? What if it looks like, let's say give it 1, 2, 3, and then the second row only has 2 values, and then the third row, it's fine, right? I'd call this like a broken matrix. So what would happen if you do that is you would get an error because you get an index out of range. Because here you assume that the number of columns is the same for every row. However, it is not, right? So then once we go to the second row, what you do in here is you are defining j of range number of columns. A number of columns is 3 because you just took the first row and you counted the number of elements in the list. So you get 3, but then once you reach to the index 2, it goes out of range, which is what's happening here. All right, so I'm not gonna go over that because you can do it yourself, and it's potentially in the assignment where you have to write a function that validates a matrix. How would you do that? Well, it's pretty simple. All you have to do is loop through the whole row and make sure that they are consistent with each other, meaning they all have the same column number. All right, I'll let you do that. And that's it for the lesson, and have a good day. See you in the next one.